Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We apologize for our technical difficulties, but we are excited to have you here to join us to provide your input on plans to remodel the space for our children's space at the Central Library. And our team is excited to hear your thoughts and incorporate your input on what you would want to see in the space. My name's Gary Schaefer. I'm the director of Glendale Library Arts and Culture, and I'm joined this evening by Yazdan Emirani, who is our director of public works, and his associate, our associate author, Asatorian, and he is our project manager for the project. I'm also happy to be joined by Nicole Passini, our assistant director here at the library, Hala Shanuda, our principal administrator, Ashley Watts, who's the head of our children's services, and Miss Cecile, one of our children's librarians. Additionally, I'm joined and kind of the stars of the show this evening is the team at Johnson Favreau, our architect, which includes Steve Johnson, Jim Favreau, and Kevin Garrity. On March 9th, 2021, the City Council awarded a professional services agreement to Johnson Favreau, LLP, for architectural and engineering services for a remodel of the children's and teen spaces here at the Central Library. Public Works, Johnson Favreau, and GLAC, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, have moved the project through the phases of evaluating the present state of the spaces, verifying programmatic needs, defining zones, etc. We're still very early in the design process, and this is the perfect time to get your input on the direction of the design for the new spaces. Tonight, we'll focus on presenting preliminary plans for the remodel of the children's space, serving ages 0 to 12, and you'll have many opportunities to share your opinions and feedback about potential changes to the space. And I'm also want to give a shout out to Linda Demers, who is a longtime librarian and space planner who we've consulted with and has helped us immensely on this project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the team at Johnson Favreau, and I think Steve Johnson is probably going to be kicking that off. Thank you again for joining us this evening.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Johnson, principal at Johnson Favreau. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I sure wish we were meeting in person, and I look forward to the day that we do. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening. Really excited to share with you the design progress, a little bit of context of where we are in the process. Dr. Schaefer mentioned we basically are in design phases right now that are roughly running through September, and that's succeeded by a construction document phase, still a development of the design that will begin around September 27th, early October. That phase will take us to the end of the year with hopefully submitting plans to your building department before the end of the year to initiate the permit process. I'm going to start by just getting you used to seeing the building in different ways than you normally look at. This is a site plan of the building, and even though we are working on an interior renovation, it's really important that we understand the context. So this is the site plan of your library with the parking structure across East Harvard. And why it's important to us is we do need to know how people enter and where people enter the building to sort of put in proper context the children's space and the teen space that we're tasked with improving, but also just maintaining a part of this renovation has to maintain disabled access to the facility. So it's important that we understand how people enter the facility. It's also of note that there's a process or a project that's in development, which is a redevelopment of the park to the south of the project, which will essentially bring the park to the south elevation of the library, removing that parking lot. So yes, a change, but in our opinion, a beneficial change, kind of more directly connect the library to the park. This is the first level of the library. The box in the middle is really one of the library's most notable features. It's double height space. It gives you orientation and provides light in the library, as you well know. And then you see at the top of the page, or north, the north entrance coming off of Harvard, the south entrance from what will be the redeveloped park that will come there. An entrance on the east, which is primarily for the auditorium and event usage, but also a staff entrance. And the two elevators that serve that space. Just for orientation, again, this is the ground floor, but immediately above, kind of highlighted here, are the two spaces that are the subject of our design effort. The children's space that we're talking about tonight, that's what we'll be talking about, and then the teen space. And why I show that is one of the real nice benefits of the double height Great Hall in this library is you have visual access to both of these spaces upon entering the building. This is important because it really aids in wayfinding in the building. It makes it very clear where these important destinations in the library are. And there are also opportunities because, as I mentioned, one of the benefits of this hall is it brings in a lot of natural light to the library, and it's an opportunity for us with the children's library to potentially open up that space to the hall to not only bring light in, but see the kind of wonderful activities of what's going on in the children's space. Moving to the second floor, you're seeing highlighted the children's space in pink in the upper right-hand corner and the existing entrance right off the elevator that most everyone uses. One of the things we are proposing that I'm going to be showing you is proposing a relocation of that entrance to the other side of the library. For a variety of reasons, again, to kind of aid in wayfinding and also to kind of improve what we think is a somewhat anticlimactic end of that corridor into a utility room. Whereas what we think would be nice is that access from the Great Hall up the stair from the elevators, in our opinion, should end in a view of the library connected to that. So yes, we are proposing a new entrance, but it is equidistant between both elevators. So both elevator access is maintained to both. People can enter from both directions to the new entrance. Reminder of the plan, again, to get you used to things you may not be used to seeing. This is the existing library in plan form. Starting at the lower right-hand corner of the page is the entrance to the library. Situated in the center of the room is the librarian's desk, the large desk at the center of the room. Over to the east are those nice reading alcoves that I think we want to take great advantage of as we move forward. At the top of the page is the room for story time with a kind of built-in amphitheater seating and a retractable accordion wall to kind of define that space. The collection, as you see, sitting kind of centered in the room. And then kind of completing one end of it is essentially the support facilities, the office space, the workspace, storage, and restrooms. So we are tasked. I'm going to just kind of highlight a few key things that I think are areas where we are looking to improve the conditions of this library. Number one, in contemporary library programming, no space really should be single purpose. We're aiming for creating places within the library space that are flexible and accommodate the kind of programming that can be offered here. So in other words, we're looking for greater area, but also more flexibility in using that. So that's certainly an improvement that we want to make. And related to that, what I've highlighted here is really the open space, if you will, within the library, the place where the activity of a child, readers, crafts, all the kinds of things that are the lifeblood of this library. They take place, they're kind of sandwiched between the stacks on one end and the large enormous desk on the other. There's really not a space of any significant dimension to kind of really take advantage of the programming that really is open to the children here. So that's certainly something we want to improve upon. And related to that is it's certainly important to just improve the visibility across the space. In other words, by lowering book stack heights and by reconfiguring them in such a way that we actually put the child at the center of library activity rather than the books. The books are important, but it's actually the activities of your children within this library that I think we want to place into the center and then increase the visibility across the space. And then finally, something that's not really a part of the children's space, the provision of new public restrooms on the second floor that will serve the second floor of the library, access from that hallway, and serve the auditorium space. So those are kind of some key goals. So with that in mind, I'm going to walk you through the floor plan as devised now, starting in the lower left-hand corner. The Great Hall would be over to your left in this image. North is to the top of the page. The new entrance at the lower left-hand corner. And once you're in, immediately to your right is the children's librarian office, with great visibility across the entire open space of the new library. The children's desk immediately to the left of that. And then just beyond that, the very youngest children, the area for early childhood. And we're essentially providing benches for caregivers and for parents to essentially kind of define that area for the very youngest children. At the northern end, we've situated the children's workroom, and then abundant storage and supply, because no place is multi-purpose unless you have storage. So in other words, the idea of multi-purpose and flexibility is the ability to move things in easily and move things easily and store them in such a way that they're there for your use. So having plentiful storage, and this is something Dr. Schaefer mentioned in our work with Linda Demers, understanding exactly with staff what are the needs of this library so that it's all at hand and can be easily moved in and out of these spaces that are now more flexibly configured. And we are providing a lactation room as well that is not in existence in that library now. At the center of things is this multi-purpose area, which is a rather generic area, a name for really the heart of this space. And I'll talk more about that in a little. It's surrounded by essentially circular casework that is storage for all of the kind of learn, play, manipulatives, and other things that kids utilize in the library for the different programs that are served within this multi-purpose area. Even seating for parents and for children is built into those semicircular benches around that space. And then surrounding the perimeter of that is really the children's collection, essentially kind of moving with the ages around the clock, if you will. The older child, it kind of moves from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock and all the way around, sort of circles around that multi-purpose area. The shear walls in the space, which you probably know very well, those gray concrete things, they've created a zone on the side of the building, which for us seemed like an opportunity that we could really make something quite special, a reading room, essentially a place for older children, a place where homework, where tutoring, or kind of one-on-one or project-based learning or something that engages just a bit more quiet or a bit more concentration is possible. So we've actually closed this with glass so that we can see into it and keep it open to the library, but acoustically separated it from the other activities. This is going to give your librarians much more flexibility in the programming. You now have two areas, a quieter area possibly to program, as I said, tutoring and homework and other activities, as compared to the other area within the multi-purpose area. So we do think that it was a nice opportunity, and it also utilizes those kind of wonderful reading alcoves as well. As I mentioned, we are providing two restrooms, public restrooms that open up to the corridor between the auditorium and the children's space. And then we're providing two generously sized family restrooms that are accessed from within the library. So you never have to leave with your children out of the children's library to utilize the restroom. And they're also within, and this is really important, they're within really sight lines of the children's desk and the librarian, seeing who's coming and going from the restroom areas. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the multi-purpose room and just a few of the ways in which it can be configured kind of every day when something is not programmed. It's a seating area. It's a place for sitting at a table with a child with a book or with a device or a pad or anything, or working, pulling something off of the shelves and utilizing it. So it is just used every day. And as I said, you can cut across it, you can move through it. But importantly, it's situated as well for story time to hold at least 100 kids, at least, with parents and caregivers being able to sit at the perimeter of that, supported by technology, in other words, mobile screens that can be brought in and facilitate story time or other presentations as well. But then as well, you can bring in the tables, the flip-top tables that are stored in that storeroom, and you can set it up for arts and crafts and projects, such as a Lego project or other things. So the goal here with this plentiful space in the center is to truly give you meaningfully configured space within the library to carry out the important library programming, as compared to the kind of what I would characterize as the leftover space between stacks and the circulation desk, which really doesn't give you the kind of opportunity to fully utilize all of the important programs that your librarians have developed for your children. So what does this look like and what does it feel like? And I think the best way to talk to you about it is just share with you what we think about, how we start thinking about it, and the conversations we have had with staff. Just really let you into the kitchen, into a design process of how we think. And it's important to always start with the context. What are we working with here? And you are in possession of a 70s era example of brutalist architecture. It's a significant example. It's one that actually has interest. In other words, Welton Beckett, who built this in 1973, is a well-known California architect who created many landmarks in the Los Angeles area. And at this point in time, you know, this library is an example, as I say, of this sort of 70s era brutalist architecture. And in this case, Wikipedia's definition of brutalist architecture is as good as any architectural historian's definition that I can think of. It essentially is a building style, if you will, that showcases the bare building materials and structural elements over decorative design. It was a movement that just said, enough with this kind of silly decoration and ornament, let's get down to the facts. So it deals with expressing a kind of muscular structure, a rational structure, even integrated with lighting. And these are truly the defining features of this building, this integration of a kind of rational structural system employed for use in lighting and expressing essentially, again, the rational structure of the building, and its materials are exposed. Welton Beckett did many examples of this. I think you kind of see with the Music Center, he got a little tired of maybe only dealing with bare materials. I'm seeing a little bit of decoration beginning to show up in that, but in any case, there's a kind of consistency to kind of an expression of structure, an expression of the function and form of the building being its ornament, being its decoration. Here's an early picture of the library in 1973. I would add that I think you've humanized it over a series of remodel. And I think an important thing is opening up that second floor. Quite frankly, I think it enhances the experience of the building. Its defining feature is made more visible. And that is something that we want to talk to you about with the Children's Library. We think that was a good move. And that's a good example of how a building can be improved or made better with its renovation, but still be consistent with this building. I think the message I would give you is that this is a serious building. It's got substance, gravity, weight. It's literally, it is a significant building. I think Jim and I, my partner, would say this is one of the more kind of significant buildings and it requires a kind of serious approach to any renovation to it. And it's part of a whole lineage of buildings. This is a art and architecture building at Yale, very famously. Raw materials, again, the expression of structure, exposed utilities, mechanical shafts. That was the language of the day. The library in Berlin, a notable resemblance, again, in the air as Mr. Beckett was conceiving your library, you can kind of see the similarities, again, of just like lighting and structure all forming together as a kind of whole to create the defining image, if you will, of the building. Our challenge is this, and it really is a challenge, and it's a challenge I think we're enjoying taking on with you. So this is your children's library, but if I were to cover up everything, the signs and anything that has an indication that children occupy the space, I'd be hard pressed to say that that's a children's library. And so that truly is our challenge. What do we do? Because I do say, Jim says, your staff says, we feel that part of this is we have joy to your children. We have to bring inspiration and indeed learning. And in fact, it's all there within the library. The library itself is a kind of definition of our path forward. We actually learn by seeing. We learn to read by seeing first. So the visual world, and I would extend that to the environment and to the architectural environment, is critical to our learning, especially for children. These books open you to a whole world of ideas. The library itself opens you to a world outside of the walls. I think this is this is the pathway for how we think about, or how we were thinking with your staff, and how we are going to develop a design that excites the child, that begins kind of lifelong learning. And I'm emphasizing this issue of learning visually. Filmmakers know this very well. Yes, there's a plot and there's an author and there's a storyline, but the making of a physical environment is as much a part of the story as anything. An architectural environment, an architectural language that we may recognize, that we may have associations with, belongs to a tradition. These are things that filmmakers know very well when they're telling a story. And so again, I think these are the things, as we pay attention to addressing this very serious building that you have, the serious approach is to tap into the tradition of architecture, the tradition of building, expose children to a world of architecture that's out there, that's been out there for hundreds of years, thousands of years, actually. And it's a magnificent tradition. And Jim and I, quite frankly, believe that starting to learn about that is a way of actually improving one's position in the world, being more visually literate. And we've done this with each of our libraries. So for example, the West Hollywood Library on the left, this is their story time room. And it's a kind of fantastical reconstruction of the first library of the Italian Renaissance, Michelangelo's Laurentian Library in Florence, Italy. We kind of fantasize that I can imagine a librarian, while telling the story, tells the history of this room that they're in. And it's a beginning of learning and curiosity about form and about buildings and about the world and culture. On the right is Beverly Hills fairy tale, the room that houses their fairy tale collection. And we again used the language of classic late 19th century, early 20th century illustration of fairy tales in particular as the ornament, as the decoration that creates an environment that we hope brings joy to a child, brings pleasure, encourages them to learn, encourages them to find out more about the books that are in the library and the world outside of that. This taps, as I say, into a very big and grand tradition with libraries in the United States. These Boston Public Library, New York Public Library, these are tourist attractions now. They are treasures. And I would submit to you, they're treasures precisely because of their architectural significance, their attention to the detail of architectural form and building on a tradition of architecture, a treatment of surface, pattern, of color, of material. These are the things that human beings need to relate to the spaces they're in. I'm going to say to you, respectfully of the building you're in, I don't buy into the issue that a building can be only about raw expression of structure. That's only part of the story. So how do we sensitively add the other part of the story? And Jim and I and our team and with your staff are going to say it's really employing centuries old tradition of how we ornament surface, how we deal with surface and architecture, and building upon that recognized tradition as we move forward. A fascination, again, with color, with pattern, and with form. I'm submitting to you substance. This is serious. In one way, it's serious stuff. It's that we meet a serious building with a kind of serious solution, one that really looks at what delights the eye in terms of pattern that cuts across all cultures and civilization in terms of color and pattern and ornament of surface. This is actually St. James Cathedral in Jerusalem, and it is for me incredible in terms of all of the visual information that is there, the tile work, the carpets, lighting, paintings, the ornamentation of surface. This, we would say to you that this is what human beings need, and that this is what makes life enjoyable and pleasurable. It's how we learn, it's how we connect to our culture, it's how we connect to our world. It doesn't mean it's all old time. This is actually a new Apple store in Rome where they've basically recovered a store, but you notice that ceiling, again, it's pattern, it's color, it's built on a tradition of form making that excites the eye, built on a tradition of architecture that is recognized and in some ways comfortable. The new Apple store in downtown Los Angeles, it's now the talk of the town in terms of architects. And it's so interesting to me, this ancient theater being converted to this modern space. It just shows how old and new become one again together in a way that excites people and makes them stay. But it isn't even just grand things. I believe this is a church in Glendale, and I love the simplicity of just painting a sky with clouds, some materials I recognize, some forms. It's evocative of a place. It is something, but it also tells us the kind of simple things one can do that actually ornament the space, that actually make it a place that we recognize, that we feel comfortable in. Again, these are domestic things that we know very well in homes, where again, the proliferation again of pattern and texture and color. This is the thing we have been investigating as we've gone through. So we're looking at panoramic wallpapers as a way, a relatively inexpensive way to give a new life to the space, to create a world within the walls of this library that would fascinate a child and tie again to this kind of this interest that the eye has in looking for patterns, looking for things, whether it be textile or architecture, whether it be ceramics or embroidery. You can see this fascination again with the natural forms being kind of stylized and made into patterns and into color. These are our ways into a world of decoration, into a way of ornament, a way that we think is an appropriate way to give finish to this library. You see it in manuscripts, this kind of alive with color and form, animal forms, natural forms, plant forms, etc. Finds its way into textiles, certainly into architectural tile work. My basic message to you, these are the tools of an architect. And they're the tools of an architect who wants to bring not only a solution that meets the seriousness of the building you have, but ties it to something bigger than what it is. And that's not to say, again, that it can't be modern and fresh and indeed fun. What are the ways we tie this to children? After all, these are very young children. So how in the way we employ, again, these papers, these forms, these things which are exciting and bring life to this space. So I'm going to take you through some study renderings of the project, starting with the entrance. And what I mentioned in the before is really opening up that entrance to that great hall so that I can see it from below and I can see it from above. And you could kind of see the benefit of opening up that wall of glass along what would be the west side of the children's space. I'm now getting the borrowed light, the great hall into the children's space and connecting the two. And I actually think this is a tribute to the building in the way that you opened up the second floor on the other side. We're opening up the vistas of the building across the length of it rather than the solid wall, and adding the benefit of light. So walking in, the children's librarian's office is on the right-hand side, the children's desk in front of you, and the early childhood area just beyond. Moving a little further in, you're looking now towards into the multi-purpose space, kind of covered by, again, a flattened dome canopy ornamented with color and pattern. Moving to the early childhood area, again, there's kind of built-in benches for parents and caregivers, but it also forms a little corral for the very youngest children. You kind of want to keep them in a place because a lot of what they're doing is on the floor. But it connects very directly and visually to the multi-purpose space that I talked about earlier, looking all the way through, and this is the issue of visibility, to the reading room at the very back, the glass enclosed reading room, librarian's office over to the right. There will be opportunities to build places for kids to inhabit or get into a space for interactive learning and learn play, a little kind of conceptually formed igloo, if you will, but it's a place that will be incorporating some of the learn play elements that are a part of library programming for our very youngest children. So we're looking back now towards the entrance across the early childhood area, the librarian's office, and distance, the multipurpose area just around or on the other side of that semicircular wall. Moving around that semicircular wall, the collection, again, we can see over it, or adults can see over it, kind of keeping those sight lines. We're seeing all the way back to the reading room. So again, visually connected, but acoustically separated. And you can kind of see we've lined the perimeter of this with this panoramic wallpaper, again, suggestive that there's a world outside, that there's a world for the children that are curious about why are those animals there? What are those animals? It's a way to not only learn, but to excite a child's imagination using, again, a kind of time-honored way of decorating the wall. So we're now at just east of the multipurpose area, looking back through a window to the reading room. Shifting over to the side, the multipurpose room is to the right, the children's collection there, and then to the left, you can see the reading room inside of the glass enclosed doors. And then the reading room itself, which we think will be a really wonderful space. It's still in its embryonic stage. We're still developing it. But the idea that it's a very special place, as I mentioned with that Harry Potter thing, it's a place that has an identity. It's a place that becomes memorable to children. It houses their important collection, but it's a place for tutoring and for homework and a little bit different activities as compared to the other. So I thank you very much for your patience tonight. I know we started late. I really look forward to a conversation with you and hearing your input and comments as we move forward. Thank you.